Hello there, I'm Juliana Michaels and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to be sharing how you can use the Tim Holtz Distress Spritz to add a touch of festive shimmer and shine to holiday cards. But you don't have to just create holiday cards. You could also use this to create any type of theme you like, because that touch of shimmer and shine always adds a beautiful touch to any project. As always, I encourage you to use supplies from your stash to follow along. However, if you are interested in the specific supplies I'm using, there are links to them in the description box below. Just click on more to see more. When you shop through those links, you are supporting me, and I really appreciate that so very much. In this video, I'm going to be working with some of the new Tim Holtz Distress Spritz sprays, and the colors I'm working with here are Frayed Burlap, Rustic Wilderness, and Bundled Sage. When working with the spritz, I've been getting some questions and concerns about it clogging, and the one thing I can just highly recommend, and Tim recommends this as well, when you turn the bottle upside down and you can see all of the pigment there in the bottom, you've got to make sure that you shake these up until that is all completely mixed in. So I've let these sit for a little bit and really let that pigment settle back out of the liquid. And there's a little rattling ball in there, and if you can't hear it right away, you might need to just kind of give it a little forceful tap on your table to kind of get that rattling ball loose. And you just want to make sure that you really shake this up and keep checking to make sure that none of that is sitting on the bottom. You want this all to kind of be incorporated into the liquid and mixed in really well before you start spraying with them. And that should help with the clogging. And then the other thing you want to do is also make sure you wipe off the nozzle after you've used it. And if you're still getting clogging, again, I would just make sure that you're really getting this mixed in. But if it does get clogged on you and you need to unclog it, just remove the entire nozzle and place it into a sink or a bowl of some warm water and just let it soak for a minute or two, and then try spraying it with the warm water kind of running through the nozzle, and that, in my experience, has helped loosen it up. So if you have any other suggestions or thoughts on that, feel free to share them in the comments below. And yeah, so let's get into it here. So along with the spritz, I'm also going to be working with Forest Moss Spray Stain. Again, you could use any colors of these that you would like, especially, you know, I'm going to be doing a Christmas themed card, so that's kind of why I went with the greens and browns. But if you wanted to, you know, do something for a birthday or other event, you could certainly switch out the colors and use what you have. I'm going to be using archival ink in ground espresso. I recommend some sort of permanent ink to be used with the stamping that I'm going to be doing here. And then I'll be working with this festive stencil. I recommend for this technique some sort of stencil like on this one here that has kind of some areas that are solid and then areas with a pattern on it. So here's a couple other ones that I kind of have in my stash that I thought would be good options. This is one called Pine Cones, and this one is called Holly Bough. And both, as you can see, kind of have these areas of solid and then design space. So one that's like completely patterned all the way across, it will work. It just doesn't give you quite the same effect. I'm going to be using the little script stamp here from the Dearly Departed stamp set from Tim Holtz. But any kind of little script or tiny text or, I don't know, there's lots of little fill-in kind of stamps that you could use for the stamping that I'm going to be doing. And then the die sets I'm going to be working with is this mini Holiday Greens die set. And I'm just using this pine branch here. And then I'm using the Vault Holiday Classic, and I'm going to be using these sentiment dies here, and then I'm also going to be using the Vault Holiday 2021, and I'm going to be just using the Gentleman die here. But again, any of these dies could be switched out for any that you might have in your stash if you're wanting to kind of play along and do a Christmas card or a different theme. As for the papers, I'm going to be switching it up and working on some Distress heavy stock this time. I wanted some sort of paper where the spray inks soaked in a little bit quicker than they do on the Distress watercolor paper. And just from a technique that Stacy Hutchison had shared, where when she did the spritzes on the heavy stock, they kind of speckled and created slightly different look. The colors didn't flow quite the same and blend the same because of the nature of the paper. So another option that could work for you for this might be the scrapbook.com mixed media paper. But again, you're still going to get a really cool effect regardless of what paper you get, unless you're working with a paper that is really porous, where when you spray the ink onto the paper and it just soaks in right away. If it doesn't stay a little bit wet when you spray it, then you're not going to get any kind of blending at all when you apply different inks. So you do want something that can tolerate and is made for a little bit of mixed media effects. And then as far as the die cutting, I'm going to be working with various colors of colored cardstock from Sizzix. This is just a real dark green, and then these 2 shades of brown, and then I've got some white. All right, so just to kind of show you with the sprays, if you remember from earlier, and this is how they look now that they're all shaken and mixed. There's really not any pigment sitting down here on the bottom like there was before. So I'm just going to take a bottle that I have not shaken up at all, and you can see the difference. Like there, you can see that there's an area of clear, and then the liquid's all mixed in, where here everything is still stuck to the bottom of the bottle. So you just want to make sure you keep mixing it until there's no more of that pigment sticking onto the bottom of the bottle, unless it's kind of like this, where it's just droplets of the liquid. But these are ready to go now. And I'm going to be working in my splat box. I always like to put some paper towels in the bottom to kind of help soak up the excess spray. And then I'm just going to lay my stencil here on top of my paper. And if you want, you can give this a little spritz of water. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to work with my sprays. And here I've got the forest moss, and I'm going to kind of hold it back a little bit because this is going to spray a lot of ink, and I just want kind of a light covering of this, so I'm not trying to get the whole thing forest moss. And now we're going to go in with the other spritzes here. Again, just always like to give them a good little shake again before I start, and then just going to give a little spritz here and there with these. And here I'm going to kind of go for some coverage of the stencil with it. And if you haven't used that color yet, you might have to pump it a couple times. So sometimes you might want to do that off to the side before you get that in there, and then there we go. And always with the sprays, I always felt like, for me, I kind of hesitate with the spraying and pushing the nozzle because I'm afraid of where it's going to go. And the biggest thing I can recommend is just, if you're worried about where it's going to go, be farther away from where you're spraying so that you have less color and spray getting onto the paper. You can always go closer, and then you'll have more. So that's just kind of one of the little tricks and tips that I could have to recommend for you. So now that we've got our spray on there, we're going to just lift off our stencil, and there is our sprayed background. And you can see it's really kind of speckledy and fleckledy on that paper, and it's just kind of gives it a really cool effect. So we're going to set that to the side and let that dry. Move my splat box out of the way here now. And now we're going to take that other piece of paper, and I'm going to get a couple more paper towels here. I'm going to place one underneath the paper, and then I've got one here to the side. We're going to take this and flip it over onto that background. Now, if you can look at this, and if you've got like some really big splotches of ink, you're just going to have, that's going to spread out more. If you've got all these little dots, you're going to get more of a speckledy effect. So depending on what kind of look you want, if you want it less speckledy, you might want to give this a little spritz of water and get those colors moving. I'm just going to go with what I have here and just go with it. So you're going to lay that down onto your paper. You could do it at an angle or straight up and down, however you like. And then you're going to take that extra clean paper towel and just dab over the top of the stencil, kind of soak up that excess ink, and kind of lift that up and see what's happening underneath there. And a little still might seep underneath, and that's okay. It's all part of the look. And then we're going to lift that up, and there is our second background created with the stencil. So now at this point, like if you don't like these big, you know, splotches of ink, you could kind of tilt it a little bit. You could also take your paper towel in and dab off some of that if you wanted. And then you can set this to the side and let it dry. Or if you like, you know, if you want to speed that up and dry it quicker, you can also use your heat tool and just give that a dry. And there's a look at that background. And I really love how the shimmer from the spritzes just kind of settles in and kind of pools together because it's a little bit heavier. And I don't know, I just kind of really love the effect you get with that kind of monoprint from the stencil. And then there's a look back at the original one that we made. And again, you can give that a dry if you like as well. And then as far as cleaning your stencil, you're going to want to clean your stencil next because we're going to use it again. Because I forgot, we're also going to use some vintage photo spray stain. So make sure you go and grab another spray stain color there. And you can just, you know, wipe this off with baby wipe, or, you know, if you want to take it to the sink and wash it off, but nothing's going to like be permanent on here because these are all water-based mediums. And now we're going to bring that splat box back, and we're going to be working with this background. So the first one where we sprayed through the stencil to get the color on there. What we're going to be doing is monoprinting onto that to kind of give color to the background here. Now if you want to leave this white, you certainly can, but this is kind of the technique that I wanted to share with you here. So kind of give our paper a little flattened down there. And then to do this, what you're going to want to make sure, again, you're going to kind of put you can have your cardstock to the side there. And you're going to, because whatever direction, so you want to line up your stencil with your paper that you sprayed it through. And then you're going to take the stencil, lift it straight up, and then flip it over. And then you're going to put the vintage photo spray on the back side of the stencil. So you just give it a good color coverage. And with this, I am going to give it some spritzes of water so I kind of really get that ink flowing because I want it to kind of fill in this background. And so then again, you're going to lift up that stencil. You don't want so much water on here though that when you pick it up, like it's all going to start running and like drips off. Because if it's that wet, you might not be happy with the result there. So I'll move that out of the way. See, I'm getting a little bit of runnage there, so I'm going to tap that off here before I lay it over on my paper. And then you're just going to kind of line it up as best you can. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then take another clean paper towel and just kind of dab through and soak up that excess ink. And then you're going to see how this is kind of filled in that white area that we had. So now if you get some areas that like didn't get any ink on them and you want some, you could always go and spray that little section again if you like. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a little bit of spray onto that area there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put a little bit of spray there onto the stencil. Kind of find it, this area right here. And I'm just going to kind of repeat that process. And then you can just lift that back up. And then, you know, if you've got any pools of ink that you don't want, you can just kind of dab those up a little bit if you like, just so they're not so dark if you want. Or you can leave them as is. And then from there, we're just going to dry that with heat tool. And if you want to add a little bit more interest to these, you could spritz these with some water and then dab that dry to kind of lift off some of that excess ink. So that's what I'm going to do. If you're worried about too much coming out, you can also take it off and just kind of flick it on this way if you like. Or you could use your hand, put some water, spritz it into your hand. So another option you can do is just to spritz it like this into your hand and then flick it like that onto the paper. And then from there we can just take kind of a clean paper towel and dab off some of that ink. So it's real subtle because we did kind of small little drops, but you can see a little bit here and there where that ink lifted off. On this one you can see it a little bit more right through there. So just adds a little bit more interest, and I kind of like the big dribbly drops, so I'm going to go back and add a few more of those. And then you can kind of let it sit a second if you like, and then go in and dab that off. There we are. Again, just adds just another little layer of interest. Definitely something you can skip if you don't want to bother with it. And we'll just give that a quick dry. All right, so now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that little script stamp and the archival ink and ground espresso, and we're just going to do a little bit of some just kind of random stamping here and there across the background. So I'm not really getting ink all over the stamp. I'm just kind of getting a little bit on that edge here. And if your paper is kind of curled up on you a little bit, you can just kind of roll it back the other direction. And then I'm just going to kind of stamp this into these open areas where it's kind of just solid. And just kind of go with whatever comes off my stamp there. Kind of rotate it through little sections and then kind of stamp here and there. A little spot there, just kind of push with my finger into that little area to get the ink on there. Really no right or wrong with this. You can just kind of do it as you like. And, you know, as much or as little. So I'm pretty happy with that. Maybe a little bit more right there. And so there's that one. And then we're going to do the same thing over on this other one. So there is a look at our two backgrounds, and the last thing I'll do with both of these is I'm just going to trim off the edges here to cut this down to 4 by 5¼ inches, and then I'm going to mat that onto some colored cardstock. But you could certainly leave it as is if you want to, and just put this onto your card base. So off camera, I took the die sets that I mentioned in the beginning and cut them from some cardstock. I did the pine branch from some green cardstock, the sentiments from some white, and I cut it twice, and I'm going to glue these together using a fine tip applicator. The one I like to use is the one from My Sweet Petunia, and I have emptied this bottle that comes with it and have now refilled it with Distress Collage Medium, which is my more preferred liquid adhesive. And then I also cut the Gentleman from the light brown cardstock and the dark brown cardstock, and then I also cut it a second time from a really thick black cardstock, and I'm going to be adhering those together to just give this a little bit more stability. But you could totally skip that part if you want. Before we do any adhering or assembling, we're going to take the Gentleman die cuts and the pine branches, and we're going to be spritzing them with some Distress Spritz. I'm going to be using Rustic Wilderness, Bundled Sage, and the Frayed Burlap. And again, just working on my splat box. This is just always kind of my preferred way to work with this medium, any kind of a spray medium, just because it keeps it from going everywhere, and it's just a little easier to clean up, especially when you put the paper towels in there to absorb it. Now, I haven't used these since we sprayed the background, so they do need to have another little shake and get that pigment mixed back in with the liquid. It won't take as much shaking because we've used it recently. As you can see now, it's kind of all clear here on the bottom pretty much. So ready to go. So I'm just going to repeat that with the rest of the bottles. All right, so now we're going to take our two Gentlemen and we are going to spritz them with the Frayed Burlap. And then I'm going to give them a spritz with the Bundled Sage. And as you can see, with this kind of paper, the ink really just soaks into that really pretty quickly, unless you get a big drop of it. And then you can just set this to the side to dry, or you can use your heat tool to dry. But you can see how the paper, especially this thinner cardstock, it really kind of gets warpy, and that's why I'm going to, once this is dry, I'm going to glue this to that second layer just to make it a little more substantial and sturdy. And then we're going to repeat that same with the little pine branches, and on this one I'm going to use the Rustic Wilderness. And then a little bit of the Bundled Sage. And then these are ready to go for our card. Here's a look at the finished cards. As you can see, I layered the background onto a piece of cardstock. For this one, I used the same dark brown that I used for the Gentleman die. I had trimmed the background down to 4 by 5¼ inches, and then the background cardstock is 4¼ by 5½ inches. Before I adhered the background, I inked the edges with some ground espresso distress ink, and then I layered the die cuts and adhered them together and then attached them to the card. For this card, I did the same thing. However, I just used that lighter brown that I used with the Gentleman die cut, and I inked the edges of the background as well here with the ground espresso distress ink, and then layered and adhered the various die cuts. I hope you enjoyed seeing how these cards came together and how you can use the Tim Holtz Distress Spritz to add a touch of festive shimmer and shine to your holiday cards. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can join me on a more regular basis. Hit the like if you enjoyed this video, and if you want to join me on my other social media platforms, you can find the links to those in the description box below. Also, feel free to leave me a comment if you have any questions or if there's something you'd love to share with me and our community. I'll see you in the comments below and in the next video. Until next time, stay crafty, my friend.